Donald Trump convicted on all 34 charges. That's all 34 charges he was facing in the criminal trial there in New York. This is coming live from the courthouse. Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts that he faced at the hush money criminal trial. That seems like a clean sweep for the prosecution. We await word, of course, from the Trump camp, but clearly we talked about this being a historical case. I mean, clearly we have history really writ large, don't we, Monte, in terms of a former US president, candidate for the Republicans going forward to the November election. He's been found guilty on all 34 counts that he faced at the hush money trial. Monte.
This is one of 4 cases he faces. You know, the only one that's actually coming to a conclusion here, we think, for the election. And really, as you say, really historic here, because you have a former U.S. president, the first, who is now a convicted criminal, and also the presumptive Republican nominee in the upcoming election. The big political question here is now, will this affect him at all? There were some polls at one point that were showing this might hurt him with independent voters, that they might not want to see a convicted felon as, you know, the president of the United States. A new poll, though, came out this morning, NPR's poll, basically saying it would have pretty much no effect on the electorate. So there are varying ideas about what effect this might have on him politically, but certainly we're looking at history in the making, Mark.
It's an absolutely remarkable fact you just come out with that the NPR poll said it would have little effect on how people would vote. One wonders how some of the Trump camp, those, for instance, I'm thinking of the religious right, who would perhaps look at what he's done in terms of his behavior with Stormy Daniels, the former adult actress, and another named woman as well, who he denied any relationship with her. He denied a relationship with Stormy Daniels. Clearly, the jury has not been convinced by anything presented in his defense. And of course, it's worth noting that Trump did not take the stand, did he? He didn't stand and give evidence or take cross-examination.
You know, he said he wanted to take the stand, he planned to take the stand, and then he didn't. In the jury instructions, the judge was very clear, you cannot hold it against him because Donald Trump did not take the stand in his own defense. You know, I just want to come back to this issue of the political consequences here, because a lot of our international viewers say, wait a minute, someone is convicted of a crime and they can still run a campaign for president and even serve, because that's certainly not the case in many other countries. We're in a strange situation here, Mark, where as a convicted felon, Trump is a registered voter in the state of Florida. As a convicted felon, you lose your right to vote. He can no longer vote, and yet he can serve as president of the United States.
Monte, we need to correct the wording of the conviction. Guilty on 10 of 34 counts.
Okay.
There's been a little bit of, how can I put it, a slip between cup and lip, to coin a phrase, between the courtroom and the journalists outside. The latest we have coming out now, it's not all 34 counts. The remaining verdicts are still being delivered, still being read. It is 10 out of 34 so far, according to reporters at the scene. And of course, we'll be joining our correspondent there as soon as we possibly can. Just to repeat, the jury at the hush money trial of Donald Trump in New York has found him guilty of 10 charges so far, is what we're seeing. There are, of course, a total of 34 felony charges that he faces. This is about the concealing of hush money paid to a woman with whom he had an extramarital affair in order to remove any possibility of bad publicity during his campaign to be elected president back in 2016. You will, of course, remember that Donald Trump won that election and served in the White House for some 4 years. He's now back on track to be the Republican candidate come November for the next election coming up and to challenge Joe Biden for perhaps a return to the White House. We are told that this conviction, the one that he faces already, 10 out of 34. The rest are still being read inside the courthouse. And this is the scene live as you're looking at it now. We are told that that conviction would not prevent him from running or indeed from being elected. But one has to wonder what effect this will have on Donald Trump's campaign and what America will make of the fact that a man who was running for president is now a convicted felon. Monte Francis is with us. He's been following the story all along. This case, Monte, is making history in so many ways.
It really is. And, Joe Biden has tried to take advantage of the fact that Trump is facing all these legal problems and really hasn't seemed to be getting a lot of traction for that. They've agreed to a couple of debates coming up, so we'll have to see how those play out. But I think that it's come as a little surprised that Biden hasn't been able to capitalize on that. I think some Democrats are really in panic mode. I read a tweet from a prominent Democratic voice last week saying, if the election were held today, Trump would win. So I think that is quite a concern on the part of Democrats and on the concern of the Biden campaign going forward. But again, this is uncharted territory.
Uncharted territory. And just sorry to cut across you, Monte. The information coming out of the court has been a little bit confused. We do know Donald Trump has been convicted. We're now seeing it is all 34 counts on which he has been convicted, which clearly is a slam dunk, to coin a phrase, for the prosecution. In this case, Donald Trump, of course, denied all culpability in this case. So all along, he denied any knowledge, as was expressed in the court, of Stormy Daniels and the other named woman involved. He denied any wrongdoing. And now he stands in a situation where he is a presumptive presidential candidate, a former US president, already making history for being in a criminal trial, and now a convicted felon, which is a remarkable state of affairs. In this case, Monte, we've heard enough evidence and we've seen enough drama that one only wonders how soon this will be turned into some kind of a cinematic event or film or something like that. Because clearly, if you saw this in the cinema, you might think, surely that couldn't happen in real life. But here it is playing out in front of us.
Really, and it was a shame there weren't cameras in the courtroom because it really could have been made for TV. You had, the star witness, you had Stormy Daniels on the stand recounting, very in graphic detail her claims about a sexual relationship with the former president. You have Michael Cohen, this very colorful person who I think it's fair to say had some very big credibility problems on the stand. And if there was going to be a fatal flaw in the prosecution's case, I think that probably was it, because Michael Cohen was the person who directly connected Donald Trump to this scheme. And you'll remember that earlier in the day, the jury asked to have reread some of the testimony of David Pecker. David Pecker was the first witness of the prosecution to take the stand. He's the former publisher of the National Enquirer. And he was really at the center of this sort of catch and kill scheme that Donald Trump was a part of, where David Pecker agreed to be the eyes and ears of the Trump campaign. We are going to find women who come forward with negative things to say about you. We will buy those stories, the rights to those stories, and then essentially hold on to them to make sure that they can't come out anywhere else. That's the scheme, catch and kill. And as you recall, David Pecker practiced something that we don't practice here, checkbook journalism, where they pay people for stories and then keep them from telling their story to anywhere else, sort of buying their silence.
Indeed, controlling the situation completely. Monte, I'll pause you for a second. Let's bring in Eric Lisann, our legal analyst, who we call upon on matters legal as often as we can. Eric, it's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. And this is a story that we've, you and I, spoken about before. Here we are now at the culmination. Now, I'll give you what I'm hearing here in the studio, coming direct from the courthouse in New York. Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts in this hush money trial. The judge thanking the jury for giving the case the attention it deserved. Eric Lisann, your reaction, sir?
Verdict by the jury. Obviously, it's a little bit surprising that it came in so quickly, but given the strength of the case, that would certainly explain it, and given the diligence of the jury, according to observers there in the courtroom and following along and even being there until 8 p.m. For closing arguments yesterday, I guess it was. The days seem to run together. It's not entire. No, it was the day before. Excuse me, the day before, and then yesterday they were charged. But it's obviously in the bigger picture, it's very historic. For obvious reasons. Never had a president convicted of any crime, much less one that impacted directly on his ability to be elected in the election. So the significance is really virtually impossible to overstate. The only thing that would have dwarfed it would have been if one of the other pending criminal trials had been competently handled by all sides and gone to trial and verdict before the election. But that seems unlikely at this point. But now we have this case, and I think it will justifiably have an impact on the ongoing election.
Eric, 11 hours and 43 minutes of deliberation. Does that strike you as a swift deliberation? What does this say about the minds of the jurors?
Well, it says that they, as the prosecutor laid out in 5 hours of closing arguments the day before yesterday, it says that they agreed and that they followed along.
Eric, Donald Trump is speaking. Going live to
of...
Donald Trump, I hope.
Okay. Should we break for Trump?
It's a rigged trial, a disgrace.
Yes, please, Eric. Please pause.
They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
Are you going to drop out?
Convicted of 34 felony counts of hiding $130,000 paid to a former adult actress in order to buy her silence over their affair, extramarital affair, which took place ahead of his campaign to be elected president in 2016, which he won. This has come to light because of the way those funds were hidden. Eric Lisann, our legal analyst, was listening to Donald Trump speaking there. Eric, in some ways, predictable, Trump's reaction, blaming everybody, of course, other than himself. He described it as a rigged, disgraceful trial. He also talked about a divided nation. Some say that he's the person who's divided it most. Give us your sense of what's been happening.
That's exactly right, what you're saying. He has been the great divider, or even Fox News, which has been sort of enabling his rise in their internal emails, which came out in the defamation trial, for which they had to pay almost $1 billion in damages, recognized his biggest enablers on air recognized that he's a divider, he's a destroyer. And that is what has vaulted him into this position, and he's going to keep on maintaining that position, because in a way this is this is an existential fight for him as well as the country, because he's trying to stay out of jail now, which is a very real possibility. He's trying to preserve his financial viability, and the only way he can do that is through a sort of a popular revolt at the ballot box. And I think he's counting on accomplishing that, even if he won't get a majority of the popular vote. He didn't in either of the last two elections, but he's counting on renewing the same type of efforts that he launched on January 6th. That's the only route forward for him for his survival. So it's a very stark decision in front of the country as a result.
Eric, as a former federal prosecutor, you know how these things work. You know what happens next. What will Trump's next move be? I mean, clearly one's thinking perhaps an appeal.
Well, of course, he'll definitely file an appeal. And the appeal, if it goes in normal course, won't be resolved for a year or possibly more, unless there's some extraordinary efforts to expedite it, which is not out of the question. But he will face a sentencing date, which the judge will announce. Normally that would be 2 or 3 months in the future from now, during which time there would be a pre-sentencing report, and each of the parties, that is the state the prosecutors from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, as well as Trump through his attorneys, would maintain their positions, put them forward, and the judge would pronounce a sentencing. In a case like this, prison is a possibility, but not a certainty, but it's certainly a very real possibility. And then the question would become, when would the sentence be executed? Would he be remanded to custody right away at the date of his sentencing? That seems unlikely, because it's more likely than not that the judge, particularly the way the judge has handled other issues such as his contempt convictions, that the judge would allow Trump to pursue all remedies on appeal before forcing the sentence to be executed. So I don't think that Trump would actually be in prison before the election. I think that's unlikely, although he could be facing a sentence of imprisonment that would be hanging over his head. So that's how this case will play out in the next several months.
Eric, I wanted to ask you about the nature of how Trump spoke when he came out of the courthouse. And we heard his various pronouncements criticizing everybody. In my view, with my experience of reporting the courts in England and a little bit here in France, a lot of what he was saying was bordering on contempt, defamation, things. For instance, he was criticizing, saying things about the district attorney. He called it a rigged, disgraceful trial. Again, matters of contempt and defamation there, which could this open Trump to more legal woes?
It could and it should, but I don't know that it will. You're exactly right. I've been commenting on that myself on social media and in other formats over the course of the trial, because he's enabled in this. He's got his attorney right there next to him, which is a violation of the attorney's rules of professional conduct, to be making material misstatements of facts to third person, because there's no evidence to support any of this, that all of this is rigged and that the judge is in the tank. I mean, he's attacked the judge based on his ethnic background and things like this. And he's already been convicted of 10 counts of contempt, for which the judge just gave him a modest slap on the wrist of a $1,000 fine for each one, which is all that's allowed by statute, other than putting him in prison. And the judge had already said he didn't want to put him in prison because of all of the logistical headaches that would entail, but that if necessary, he would. But all of this conduct, these statements outside of the courthouse, neither the district attorney nor the judge on his own have taken them up. And it's a concern. It's a very, very big concern. And it's been left unaddressed because the focus, perhaps understandably by the district attorney and the judge, has been just to get this trial, a very big and complicated trial, through to its conclusion and safely through to the jury, which they have done. And it should also be noted that the jury had a profoundly difficult task, because they had to stay focused. They knew that there were threats, but they also knew that the verdict of history would be upon them. So they did their job, and now that part of it is done. But we have perhaps the more complicated part, the more difficult part, which you're referencing here in your questions, which is how Trump is going to react to this and what the consequences are for the country. And if the rule of law is to stand, the procedures have to go as they're constitutionally mandated, and the sentencing has to go forward. And if he is in contempt, at some point that's going to have to be addressed. That part has not yet been addressed.
Eric Lisann, for now, thank you very much indeed. Former federal and state prosecutor Monte here within the studio to bring his insight and analysis, having followed the story from the start. Let me, before we leave you for a very short break, give you the breaking news. Donald Trump convicted on all 34 felony charges in the hush money trial. This adding to the 10 contempt charges that he faced, which now seem like very small beer, given he's been convicted and is now basically a felon. That's the former president of the United States. History has been made in the worst possible sense in New York. We'll bring you more after a very short break.